Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer specializing in system-centered technologies. Today's discussion is part 11 of an ongoing series talking about application deployment in Configuration Manager 2012. Today's focus will be on the use of the task sequence engine for deploying applications. Now, I use the term application generically, so applications certainly could include packages. The demos that you'll see in a bit are going to be focused on the specific applications in the new application model and so on. But as far as use of task sequence, it can be used to deploy applications, packages, whatever content you might need, right? But the ability for task sequences to handle package deployment has been around since Configuration Manager 2007. In fact, one of the reasons, if you will, that task sequences became very useful for deploying packages is they really helped address some unique deployment scenarios that the package engine itself just couldn't handle. It didn't have the sophistication. Well, the application model really does have a lot of that sophistication, though there are still times the task sequence engine is useful, right? So we asked the question, well, and the other thing too, task sequences are really in the category of operating system deployment. That's where the task sequence engine really shines, is an operating system deployment. That's what its purpose is. But just because that's the purpose of the task sequence engine doesn't mean you can't take that goodness out of the task sequence engine and apply it to very complex, detailed scenarios for content, application package deployment. So that's where we are today. So the question you'll hear sometimes is what really is the role for the task sequencing engine in Configuration Manager 2012 for the purpose of deploying content? Should you use it? Should you use packages? Should you use applications? Should you use all three? Well, the answer really is you can and should use all three depending on your needs. Okay? Certainly, if you ask the question, you might hear different answers on when to use various options. But the truth is, the application model, the new application deployment model in Configuration Manager 2012, is very, very robust and can handle most any scenario that you throw at it. Now, having said that, there are certain scenarios that it just can't handle, some very complex scenarios. If you can use the application deployment model, the engine, the default one, then the recommendation is that you do so. A lot of time was invested in that. You get advantages, tracking different things by using the model as a whole as it is. But in those scenarios that you just can't use the application deployment model as it is, you can introduce the task sequence engine and add some additional goodness to your deployments. So why would you use the task sequence engine in Configuration Manager 2012 to deploy applications? And I'm going to focus on applications again. Certainly, packages would apply as well to this discussion, but focusing on applications. If you really need total, complete flexibility over your deployment, then using a task sequence gives you that. All right. Task sequences can really help drive very complex deployments. So deployments where you want to use variables, conditionals to really drive the flow of the deployment, you can absolutely use task sequences for that. Now, in the default application model, you can use conditionals and such to make decisions as the application is rolling out, particularly in the requirement rules section, as we've seen. But in task sequencing, you can use those conditionals ahead of deploying the application, after deploying the application, to address certain specific deployment scenarios. Okay, I'll try to show you some of that as we get to the end of the discussion today. For another reason, why would you use task sequences? If your deployments don't fit a particular application or package model, then certainly using task sequences can help. So there are some things that maybe don't lend themselves, if you will, to directly fitting into the application model or package model. We can handle those. Deployments that require very precise control of the events that happen. You can't have any chance that things go different than the way you build it in the task sequence. Well, that is perfect scenario for a task sequence. Okay, so why shouldn't we use a task sequence in Configuration Manager 2012 to deploy applications? Well, task sequences, by their nature, exclude interaction with users. You can get around that to some degree. There are places you can plug in some user interactivity, but the design nature of task sequences really precludes that to a large extent. Also, the applications that you want to deploy through a task sequence really cannot be deployed to users. They are system specific. So in that case, that would be another reason why not to use a task sequence to address a deployment scenario if it's going to users. And there are others. You'll see them talked about here. Here are a few of them here and there, but those are the ones on my mind. Okay. So, all right. Now we've decided we might have a scenario where we need to deploy an application with a task sequence. What are these specific requirements that we need to meet in order to deploy with a task sequence? Well, these are very similar to what we had for packages in 2007, Config Manager 2007. I'll show these to you. Now, in fact, let me go ahead and bring in my lab, and I'll show you what some of these requirements actually are. So stand by while I pull in my lab environment. And here's our software library node. So if we go to our application, and you'll see a lot of the applications here, or all of them really, that we're going to use today in our demo. A lot of these are ones we've already demoed in different ways in previous sessions on application deployment, so we'll just make use of them again to drive what we're doing here today. But if you look at these applications, this is one that I'm going to deploy with the task sequence here in just a minute. One of the things about this application is it must, if I can go to properties on it real quick, it must be configured with this switch enabled. So just like in a package in Config Manager 2007 and in 2012, you have to specifically allow for a given application to be deployed via task sequence. And when you do this, it doesn't require that this particular application be deployed at all. In fact, if I pull this down, you will notice that a lot of my applications here, this one's one of them, aren't actually not deployed anywhere. But I'm going to be able to run them through a task sequence anyway. All right. Another thing, if we go to our deployment type and edit the properties on this and take a look, and then go to the user experience, a deployment type must be targeted to install for system, and also you have to select either whether or not a user is logged on or only when no user is logged on. Why? Again, this kind of points to the expectation that you're not going to be involving the user. This is going to be a system only targeted event. We're not going to factor the user really at all, and so those things have to be met. If you don't have this configured correctly, then when you go to the task sequence and try to browse for a given application, it just simply won't show up, right? So you'll know that something's wrong with that application if it doesn't show up in the list for you to choose. Okay, so those are the main ones. Now, while I'm here, let's take a look. So the first demo, I'm just going to go into demos now. So the first demo, there's three that I want to do, 3 task sequences. Really, they're all the same task sequences, just certain things turned on and off. I want to go into these 3, show you how these work, ask some questions about them, and then we'll end up talking about the flow of events through the task sequence. All right. So three scenarios. The one that's notably absent here is the deployment of a basic application, no bells and whistles, whatever. I took that out just because it adds a 4th demo and it really doesn't add a ton to the discussion because we expect a basic application to deploy without a problem, right? It's then when we add some complexity, like applications that have dependencies, applications with supercedence relationships, requirement rules, those kinds of things, that we run into questions about whether these things will work through the task sequence environment. So I'm going to show you 3 task sequence runs. The first one is going to only be focused in on dependencies. So this is the one in this first task sequence I'm going to run. So if we look at it, there's no supercedence relationships on here. If we go to the deployment type, we do see that there is a dependency relationship defined. So in this case, we will depend directly on dependency 1. If we were to look at dependency 1, we would see that it has a dependency on dependency 2. So if I were to deploy this through the standard deployment mechanism for the app model, that would work. We would see dependency main come in, dependency 1, I believe I said, and then dependency 2. Those two dependencies would flow in accordingly, right? But in that case, we'd have to have a deployment for at least dependency main. In my case, I've got a task sequence that is going to do the magic of that. No deployment's necessary. None of the three are actually deployed. So let's go look at the task sequence. And again, all three of these are the exact same task sequence, just with different things enabled. So here's where we'll start. And I'm not going to belabor too much the task sequence today because that is, again, more an operating system deployment kind of discussion. We will get into the weeds a little bit on it, but I'm not going to go through the different actions and things like that are available because those mainly are OSD kind of discussion. So what I've tried to do is build up a task sequence that you could kind of maybe envision a structure like this for deploying an application in a production environment. My examples are kind of silly, right? They're lab environment examples only. But the point is, I've got this main installation block for my applications. And then if an error were to come up along the way, I have created an error handling group. Now, I haven't populated it with anything to do if an error comes up because I just didn't want to take the time for this. But the idea would be that you could do that and then control for different errors that could pop up as you execute the task sequence accordingly. Again, more on that as we get to discussion of the task sequence flow of events. So in the first group, we have what I'm calling environment prechecks. And the first thing I'm going to do is take a snapshot of my directory structure. I'm just going to run a command to do a directory, pipe it out to a text file. If you look out, by the way, on the, oops, wrong one. Here, let me go to the root of the C drive. If you look at the root of the C drive, this is where you would expect to see the output of the directory structure. When it runs, you can see that it's empty right now. There's nothing there, so this is a clean environment. Has not run this yet in this environment, so we're good there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to install a reg key that will flag to us. Maybe there's an application or something that tracks that an installation of software is being done. You know, whatever. So while the task sequence spins up, we're going to add a registry key that simply flags the installation is ongoing. It's running. And the registry key we placed in a package. So I define that package. I'm telling it to run it from that package. That way I can distribute that package and so on and run from there. Little tangent. So if you have a series of scripts or whatever that you use in the environment to do different things, right? There's nothing that says, for example, and I've seen one customer do this, that you couldn't build a package containing all 20, 30 scripts that you need for different maintenance jobs in your environment. Drive them all through a run command line section, just supplying different command lines, all referencing the same package so we know where to get them. So kind of a nice shortcut to be able to locate the content and control it through ConfigMgr. All right, so that's what that does. Then we get into our install application block. And you notice I have three sections where I'm going to install applications. The first is my dependent application. So all I'm doing here is referencing dependency test main. So when we get here, basically it's going to pause for a little bit and work through it, and hopefully at the end of the day, if it works well, we'll have dependency main as well as dependency 1, dependency 2 laid down on the drive. The way we'll know that is I actually write flag files. That's all it is. It's just batch files that drive this. Flag files on here. So we should have 3 flag files at the end of the day that help us know that this actually worked the way it's supposed to. All right, then we have these two, which are currently disabled in this iteration. I just threw this in. It's disabled, but I just threw this in to say, you know, you could even add a group here after you install all your applications. If you just want to proactively reboot the system, get everything set in order, restart the computer into the running OS. Here's an option for it. Again, it's disabled for now. Then you can do that. Then the task sequence just carries on. And then we have our post-install task. So we're going to go run another command to delete the registry key that we added. Then we're going to copy the logs to the root of the C drive, we're going to use one of the built-in task sequence variables to know where the logs are, and then we're going to finish up, and we're done. All right? So let's go ahead and kick off this first task sequence. So let me maximize this again, and we will go ahead. Let me go into Software Center here. Well, where is Software Center? There it is. And we will go ahead and open this up. Now, this is got into the type of operating system. It's not an operating system deployment, but it's going to come up like it is one and ask me to confirm, and I will. So a little bit of an oddball there, but we'll go ahead and run this. So just watch as we step through the different sections, groups, whatever, of the task sequence, and we'll see what happens at the end. So let me go ahead and you see it's running. Let me go ahead and pull up proactively the C drive, and we'll see if there's any content added. I'll kind of crunch this a little bit. So you see the first thing coming in. That's just part of running the task sequence. Okay. I'll expand this a bit so we can see. See a little bit better. Expand it a bit more. All right. So we're running the action. Install dependent applications. We're going to hang here for a little bit while we do that. Again, the key, notice that we have our pre-deploy dir.text, so that ran. That was part of the pre-deployment actions. So then the key will be 3 text files named differently that show up here if our dependency test actually works. So it should, and we should see those here in just a minute. All right, so we will just hang tight here while it finishes up and see what we can see. And we see, here they go, dependency 2, dependency 1, main deploy. So they worked just like they should. So we're finishing up our dependency test, and then we'll finish up the task sequence, say that everything's successful, and we're good to go. All right, and here, last step, we copied our logs so we can tell exactly what happened. All right, so that's the first demo. Nothing too complex, just to show that even an application with dependencies defined will run just fine and not have a problem at all. We're good to go. All right. So again, these are log files. I'm going to show you the log files, but I'm going to wait a little bit till I get done with some of these demos and go to the logs and look at those for a minute. So for now, I'm just going to delete those because they're going to keep copying over as I run this. Okay. So now, for demo 2, let's add in a supercedence. So basically what I want to do is rerun exactly what happened, because you see it's the same task sequence. And now, though, I have enabled the second step. So this is going to be the supercedence relationship. So let me show you. So if I come in here, now this is enabled. So basically what this is going to do is upgrade, if you will, or supersede. If we have a deployment of rich copy on the box, then this will detect it and deinstall it and replace it with robocopy. All right. If rich copy is not there, it's fine. We don't have to worry about it. We'll just go ahead and install robocopy. But let's go ahead and make it as difficult as we can, and let's go back and install rich copy on this client. All right, and make sure that it's there. So here I should have a path to rich copy, and I'll go ahead and run that right here. Oops, there we go. And let that install, and then we will kick off our task sequence and see how we handle this. I'm just going to run this through real quick. Shouldn't take long, and we'll be in business. So off we go. Alrighty. Alright, so almost, and we are done. So rich copy should now be here. Let me go ahead and get this out of the way, and we can just go verify it. We should have rich tools installed here. We do indeed. So now let's go run this second one. So like before, we'll just go ahead and run through the dependencies. Those are all there now. And then the key, if we know the supercedence has worked successfully, is that we will have robocopy exe placed in the root of the C drive, And when we go investigate, we will find that rich copy is now gone. Okay, so we'll let that process a bit and just see what we have at the end of the deployment. So again, running through the pre-actions, adding our registry key. Now we're going to go do the application install. Here we go through our dependency list again. And here's a question. So each one of these apps have a detection rule in it. So we have to have logic in the app definition to detect whether it's present or not. So the question on the table, which I'll loop back to in a minute, is whether the presence of the detection logic on the app will prevent it being reinstalled if it's already there. So in other words, I've already installed the dependencies, dependency 1, 2, and 3. But I'm just doing it again. So did I go through and reinstall them even though they're there, or was the task sequence able to take the detection logic, see that they're there, and not reinstall them? All right, so we will investigate that in a minute and take a look. All right, so we're finishing up. Robocopy is now deployed. You see it has shown up. We will let the task sequence finish up, and then we'll go see what the scenario looks like from there. So copying the logs over, task sequence should be done, and now we have a success. So successful deployment, good to go, and the task sequence is done. All right. So let's go take a look and find out if, in fact, rich copy was deinstalled like we think that it should, based on the supercedence relationship. So if we just click on the Start menu and take a look, all programs, rich copy is now no longer here. Well, let's just be sure. Let's go into Control Panel, Programs and Features, and make sure that, oops, go over here, right there, right in front of my face. Go over here and see if rich copy is in the list. Indeed, it is not. So as we thought, the supercedence relationship is respected when we deploy a task sequence, when we deploy an application through the task sequence. No problem at all. All right. Cool. So now let's go factor in demo 3. So in this one, we are, again, going to run through what we just did, solve the same task sequence. The first one will be our dependencies, and the next one will be our supercedence. We'll run through that again. And then we will add a requirement rule. So let me go back to the console and show you what we have. So back to the console. So if I go in and look here, okay, and edit it, now all of these are lit up, and we're good to go. The only thing, in fact, disabled here is the restart, because I just don't want to take the time for that, though it would work just fine if we wanted to. So here we have a required app, and this app basically is one that in previous demos I said this has to be there. It is a mandatory required application. And so just to demonstrate how that part works in typical application deployment, so I'm going to install it here. I'm going to tell it to install. It's required. But if I go look at the definition for this app, okay, and let me just show you here, okay, if I go look at the deployment type, and look at the requirement rules on it, as soon as it comes up here, there it is, I see that in order for this application to install, my operating system must be Windows Vista, and that's it. So obviously, you can tell the operating system I'm using for demos, well, trust me, it's all Windows Vista, there they are. The operating system I'm using for demos is Windows 7. So in classic app deployment, this wouldn't run, right? You could deploy it to a collection all day, but on a Windows 7 system, Windows XP, any OS other than Vista, it's not going to run, right? So let's go see if the task sequence actually respects that and whether we get installed correctly. So I'll go ahead and kick this off. And if this installs the required app, what we will see is that we will have a file added to the directory here with the name mandatory. If it's not added, then the app has, in fact, not installed. All right. So we'll just let the task sequence run here for just a minute and see what happens as a result. Okay. So let's just watch here. So we're running through again the install dependencies, and then we're going to go through and try to do the supercedence. Robocopy's already there, so no big deal. And then we'll go try to add our required app. So we'll just watch while it finishes up here. Okay, so cool, moving on. Here's our robocopy from rich copy. I'm actually going to go ahead and remove these because I want to get fresh logs. No big deal. So there we go. And then finally, required mandatory app. So again, if this works, we should see mandatory dot .exe, I believe it is, .bat, whatever, a flag file, basically, the batch file I'm running here will put down. So let's see what happens. And we're finished. Lo and behold, there is no file that's been added here. There are the logs, but no mandatory file. Okay. So now that we know that the mandatory app, in fact, did not install because the requirement rules are adhered to, then let's look at some behind-the-scenes stuff. So I'm going to do this in two steps. First, I want to look at the logs that were generated by this mandatory install, or by this latest task sequence run, which was task sequence run 3. And I want to look at these from two perspectives. First of all, we'll start with this. I want to show you what kind of processing actually takes place in the log to install the task sequence. So, to install an application through a task sequence. Task sequence logs have always been really good, very verbose for installing or recording the install and flow of different things during the task sequence. Well, with applications, that verbosity kind of goes up a level, especially with the section where we're installing the application, because there's so much that goes on to get the job done. So let me go to that section of log where we have the mandatory app. So here it is. This is where we're installing it. So you, if you viewed the client-side application install discussion we had, you would see the detail in the logs and several components that talk together to get the job done of getting all the different pieces of the app together, making sure it's installed well, reporting back status, and all that kind of thing. Well, in a task sequence, we have to do all of that in one log. So I'm not going to go into great detail about it here, but if you scroll on down, you will just notice that we have to assemble all of the different configuration items. All right, scroll on down. There's a bunch of stuff here. Here's the components, if you will, for the application that we care about. So I'll come to this in just a minute. Okay, so here's another one, right? So here is our particular application. This is the mandatory application. It's easy to get lost in here if you don't know what you're looking at, because here's another section looks just like it, but notice this is application 57A9. There is nothing really in here to show you very often. Occasionally you'll see some friendly names, but most everything, like the client logs, goes by ID. So the question is, how do you know what ID you're looking at and whether it's the right one? So the app we care about in this set of logs is the mandatory app. Well, if you go back here and look at the mandatory app and scroll over, you have to add this column. It's not here in the console by default. You can just right-click up here and add it. Okay. You'll see the ID. So here it is, application underscore 731C4. That's ours. So where we see the status coming back for application 731C4, we know that's related to our app. So if we go back to our client and search for that, app 731, I actually have it in memory already on the clipboard right there. If we find that, then we see every entry here related to that is referring back to our app. So what we're looking for is something that tells us whether or not this thing needs to install. So we keep on searching, and here in a second we'll hit it. There it is. Not required. Right? It's not required because we don't match the deployment logic, the requirement rules for installing it. So we evaluate it, we check it out, we don't actually require it, so we don't install it. Okay? But you can just scroll through here and see how much stuff is going on. So the DCM agent is involved, the application installer component of the task sequence, all the different things are involved in reporting back, evaluating things, and so on. Right? Okay. So the last thing that I want to get to in the logs, and these have rolled over, I'm quite certain, so I'm going to actually rerun this again so I get fresh logs. And I want to show back here. So let me start this running. So this task sequence, this one right here, you'll recall, it's a funky one again. It's really not an operating system install, but nonetheless, it's running now. This one is just simply deploying our dependent applications. So the question is, I already have those dependent applications deployed. So all that I have, the detection logic. So I asked a question as we started, right? If I have detection logic defined on an application and I rerun that application through a task sequence, does the task sequence have the ability to look at the detection logic and respect the fact that the app is already there and just skip over it, or does it always install it fresh? Okay, and that's what I'm trying to show here. The apps, the dependent apps, all three of them are here. All we have is flag files that are present for the detection logic on the apps. So the question is, are we looking at these apps and avoiding reinstall of the app, or are we reinstalling again regardless? Okay, so we're going to look in the log, and we need to see if we find any indication that this app is actually getting reinstalled or if it's getting skipped over. Okay, so as before, I'll start with this one. It's the rollover log, and I want to start by searching for dependency. Okay, so here is the top of my processing loop where I'm installing my dependent application. Well, as I scroll down, I'm going to get into a whole bunch of IDs. So I need to know what ID is associated with my dependent app. And like before, I will just go to the console. Here is dependency main right here. Okay, and I will scroll over and see that the ID is actually application underscore 57A9. So if I go look for 57A9 on my client, here in the log, let me go back here. So application 57A9 is actually on my selection list. I've already typed it in before. And find it. Let's see what we find. Is there any indication that this thing needs to be rerun, has been rerun, will be rerun, anything? So like the previous example, we see it running through. And here in just a sec, I think we just saw it. Let me search up. And there's several instances of it, so if I would have missed that one, I'd find another one. There. This app is enforced. Well, what does that mean? What does enforced mean? What that actually means, and you wouldn't know it necessarily just by looking at this log, but what I'm going to show you in just a minute, it'll be pretty clear to you. That means that the app is already present. And so we don't need to do anything with it again. So if I just scroll through this, take a good mental snapshot of this, because all I see is enforced, over and over. So as I'm scrolling for this, there's really nothing else to tell me anything but enforced. Again, I know what enforced means. It means the application's there, so there's nothing that really needs to happen. We're definitely going through the motions to make sure, and we're looking at the detection logic, seeing that it's there, it's enforced, it's no problem, so we don't need to do anything. Okay? Well, let me go back to the beginning and clean this up and run it again. So how would I know what enforced means and whether it actually means it needs to be bypassed or installed again? So what I'm going to do is get rid of these flag files that are basically the detection logic to tell it that it's already there. And I'm going to rerun it, and let's see what it says. Okay, so just wait for that to rerun. And then we will see a little bit of a different story. Again, we're going to hone in on the application ID to help us track what's going on, and we'll see a little bit of a different story this time as opposed to just a somewhat confusing entry of enforced. All right. So we'll just wait for this to finish up, and then we'll go forward. All right. Actually, let me pull up the here. And so we should see those dependencies laid back down here any second, and then followed by the logs, and we will use those logs to take a look at things. Come on. There we go. Starting to lay down. And so we're basically done. Now we're just waiting for the logs to come over, and we can take a look. So in this case, basically it was a clean environment. We did not find the dependency, and so we had to install them. So what did that look like? Well, as before, let's just go to the top. I'll search for dependency, and then I will find the same ID, because it is the same ID, and see what kind of different information we have. So here it is, 57A9, and find. So let's just F3 through this, and we'll figure out in just a second. Okay. So we see enforced. So we did just see a similar enforced. So let me show you that. Okay, find up. So there's enforced. So you might think, well, so it looks exactly the same, Steve. Well, yeah, it does at first, but in just a couple of clicks, you'll see something different. So scrolling on down, here's another enforced. And then here in just a minute, right here, available for enforcement. So it is the same app ID. Yeah, there's a lot of resolving different things to go through it, but basically that's the difference. This app now is available for enforcement versus already being there. So here it is again, available for enforcement. So you know then that this thing actually needs to get deployed, and it does get deployed, and we're good. So enough about the logs. You can certainly read those to your heart's content if you like, but that's all I will do for the logs in this session. All right, so let's go ahead and return to the PowerPoint for a minute and talk about task sequence flow. So here is a blown up version of our task sequence. And the question on the table now is, how does the flow of this task sequence actually work? In other words, basically step me through exactly how we roll through this task sequence from the top. All right, and obviously not being interactive here, we can't do that live. But I will tell you, most times whenever I ask, in fact, I can't remember a single time when I've asked this question that I did not get back the response that I'm going to tell you now. So basically, we start at the top, and it kind of gets boring to the people I'm asking pretty quick because it seems redundant, right? And I'll ask them, okay, what's the next place we go from here? And they'll say, well, okay, we go to the next group, in this case, environment pre-check. And then I'll say, okay, great, so where do we go from there? Then they'll say, well, we go to the next step, which in this case is snapshot directory structure. I'll say, okay, good, so now where do we go? They'll say, well, you can kind of sense them getting a bit frustrated now. They'll say, okay, we go to the next step, which in this case is import, install, and progress reg key. Then I'll say, okay, great, now where do we go? And they'll say, well, we go to install applications. And that's where I stop them. Because this is key to understanding the flexibility and the power of a task sequence, to be able to build this thing correctly. All right? We do, in truth, go to install applications, but we don't jump from here to here. Okay? Instead, what happens is, just as was said, we start up here. This is a top-level group. Notice that these groups are nested underneath this folder. So is this group nested underneath this folder. It's in parallel line with these steps. So what happens is, we do start here. We start processing this group. Well, this group contains this group at the top. So we start processing this group. And so we go into this group, process this step, and then we're done with this group. There's no other step inside this group to execute. So what happens is, we return control up to this group, and then we just continue down in order. So the next thing in order is to move down to this group, and then to move in here, down to here. Now we're in this group, and we go into this step because it's in this group. Yes, it's disabled, so we don't process it, but we certainly log it. And once we're done here, we return control back up to this group. There's nothing further to do at this level, so we return control up to this group. Now we return or move down to here. We process this group, do this step, and then return control up here, return control up here, and now we're done with this group. But there's another peer group in line, so we return control down here, do any steps related, and then we're done with the task sequence. That's pretty important to understand these things, because when you do understand these things, it opens the door to all sorts of possibilities as far as logic. Okay, so let me I actually put together a slide, kind of a busy slide, to illustrate that. Here it is. I'm just trying to show you the flow here to here to here, and then back up to here, then down to here, then here, 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 then back up to here, then down to there, there, back up to there, at the top, and then the bottom. That's exactly what I just went through, right? A little bit noisy, different colors. Hopefully, it illustrates the point. But to really illustrate it, let's pull back in the lab for a minute. And let me go back to the site server. So what I showed you, I kind of built this task sequence this way on purpose in this form, so I can go and show you a couple of things. So again, I'm not going to get off in the weeds in this too much, but if you can understand the flow of things, again, you understand how much power there is in task sequencing. So on every step, so we certainly see the list of steps here. We see by clicking on a step what that step will do. We see the groups, right? So with every single step in the task sequence, we have the ability to both determine whether we execute that step and then what happens if that step fails. So let me give you an example. So we could, if we look at every options tab in a task sequence by default, we have this button here, continue on error. It is not selected. So what does that mean? If continue on error is not selected, if we have an error right here and we fail, then we do not continue down through the rest of this group. We just hand control right back up here and then right back to the top. And if we don't have continue on error selected here, then we fail, right? Now, if we do have continue on error set up the chain, then we'll pass control on down and we'll continue down to error handling. That fact gives you control as to determining what you do should you detect an error. I'll give you an example. So it could be, let's just go with this for a minute, that I expect that I could possibly get an error here. And if I get an error, I don't want to stop the execution of the task sequence. I want to continue it. Right? So I can set continue on error here. All right? Now, what I can do from here is create another group. So I'll just throw in something here, call this handle error condition. All right, good enough. And then I will create a new group called a handle no error condition. Good enough. All right. Now, so this one, let me move it up so it's a peer. There we go. So these are all peers. So these are straight in line. So what I have is this one executes and either it errors or it doesn't. Either way, it's going to continue, right up here. Oops. Yeah, it's going to continue. So if I error here, then now I have a decision to make. I'm either going to go into this group or into this group. I'm sorry. If I error here, then I'm going to go into this group. If I do not error here, then I want to go into this group. So how do I make that decision? Well, what I can do is I can simply go in here and go into options. I turned that on by mistake. And add a conditional. So in this case, I'm going to use a built-in system task sequence variable. And honestly, I don't remember the names of these, so let me show you a web page where you can actually go get these pretty easily. Let me do a Bing search real quick. All right, so OSD task sequence variables. This is a nice list of the task sequence variables. These are the system variables. You can define your own, which is very, very powerful. You can define them internal to the task sequence, external to the task sequence. But let me just search. I want to find error. Okay, So TS error dialog timeout, that's not the one I want. Last TS, last, let's see. Last action return code. Okay, so that's what I want. So this will return error or not. This will also last action succeeded. So I can say true or false. Let me just use this one. So that's a system task sequence variable. All right. So let me close that out. So I'm just going to use it here. Variable name. Ready? Don't remember what it was. Let's see. SMSTS last action succeeded. That may not be exactly it, but it's easy to look up. Okay. So if the last action succeeded equals true, then I'm going to enter this section. Okay. Now you may want to reorder this and do the logic and different things. I'm just showing you what you can do. So if the last action succeeded is true, meaning this was fine, then I'll go ahead and do the processing in this group. But I may not want to. I don't want to do that. So if there was an error condition, we're not going to be last error condition is good, and so we won't enter this group. Let me go get SMS last action succeeded. So I'll go on this one. So options, conditional, task sequence variable, underscore SMSTS last action succeeded equals false. Okay, so that would be an error condition, perhaps. And so that, just by doing that, and again, I know you definitely want to put some more organization to it, thoughts, things like that, but just by doing that, I've injected some control into the flow. So in one case, I'll go into this group, do the steps. In the other case, I'll go into this group and do the steps, right? Well, I can take that control onto an individual step. So, for example, I think of operating system deployment. One of the things that you do in operating system deployment is try to load drivers for a particular PC that you're imaging. Well, you can have a single task sequence to handle all sorts of different models of systems and inject certain driver sets based on the model of the PC that you can add a conditional for, right? You can do a WMI query, figure out what the model of the PC is, and then inject the appropriate drivers accordingly. So there's all sorts of flexibility with this. Down here, you notice that I did not fill out the error handling section. I can do anything I want in the event of an error. So I can just have continue on error set strategically through this section, ultimately making sure that when I exit this group, whether it be successfully or with a failure, that I go on down to error reporting or error handling. So on the error handling section, just like up there, I can set a task sequence variable that last action succeeded equals false, and that would indicate a failure. So I would then go process error handling, right? So again, that's all I'll say about it. Just hopefully that little bit gives you a sense of how powerful the task sequence can be. Talking about the flow, talking about the conditionals, talking about the variables. Hopefully that gives you a sense of how that works. Okay. The last thing that I want to show you is this SMSTS log, and this is a log that I kind of debated whether to show you, but I will. So this came from a task sequence that I built to specifically show the way that the flow works, right? So basically, let me show this. So what I had is a main group. Okay, I don't have that task sequence anymore. I'd show it. I had a main group, and here I had continue on error set. Okay, then I had step 1, step 2, step 3. Okay, then I had, pardon me, error handling that I wanted to enter. So on this step, I intentionally caused a failure. All right, and the log that you're going to see as a result of that failure is what I have. So basically, what you would expect, just according to what I told you, is we would start executing main group. We would do step 1, step 2. We would error on step 2, return control to main group, and because we have continue on error set, we don't exit. We just move on to the next group. Okay, so let's see what that looks like in the log. So we'll start the processing. All right. Start on through. Let's find main. parsing group main group. So we're just discovering the components of the task sequence. Now, start executing instruction main group. Okay, instruction 0, so we're at the top. And we're going to go through group main group has successfully started, running through here. Now we're at instruction 1. I'm doing a simple directory, no problem there. So run that through. It should work okay, I believe. And no, it actually didn't. So that's where I put the error on step 2 intentionally, and I actually made a typo, as I recall now, on step 1. So even step 1 failed. Either way, one of the steps underneath failed. So we got to exit code of 1. Typically, that would cause the task sequence to fail. In this case, I go ahead, I see, hey, file not found, because I did the typo. And now we're going to return control to the top level. So let the parent group, main group, decide whether or not to continue. The group main group ignored the action failure and continued the execution to the next step because of my setting continue on error. So now I go to child group. So it wasn't error handling, it was child group has been successfully started, and I process from there. So that is a very quick and dirty example just to show you the flow that I illustrated in a larger sense with the PowerPoint. All right. So hopefully now you have a sense of how you can use task sequences to deploy applications, knowing certainly if the application can be deployed with the app model to use that preferentially, but you can use them with task sequences. And you hopefully understand a bit about the power of task sequences for things other than just simply operating system deployment, the logic, the flexibility you can inject into it, and the goodness you can use just to handle some of your complex deployment scenarios. So with that, we will wrap the session, and we will see you next time.